Great. We had about 13 people register. If people want to turn on their video so I can make sure that, okay, awesome. Hello, everybody. So we had about 13 people register and we have about half of the people on. So if you guys aren't opposed of waiting just a couple more minutes for some other people to try to get on, that would be awesome. But anyway, thank you guys so much for registering. We're so excited. If you guys want to unmute your microphone too as well, I really want this to be kind of an interactive presentation. If you guys have questions or comments, or, you know, I myself sometimes have a burning question. I can't wait for the end, or if I do wait for the end, I forget what I'm going to ask. So if you guys want to unmute your microphone, go ahead. You're more than welcome to. We love you know, audience participation. So I definitely want this to be informative for all of you guys. And hey, I hear some people talking. Oh, there's somebody entering. Awesome. So, you know, we at Louisville Family Audiology, one of our biggest kind of, you know, messages that we like people to really understand is that our ears are, you know, connected to our, you know, the auditory pathway in our brain. And so our brain is really where that magic is happening. So our motto for Louisville Family Audiology is the hearing healthcare your brain needs with the compassion you deserve. So it really is, you know, hearing care is healthcare, and it's really important to, you know, treat your ears with all kinds of, you know, love and respect, because it really is stimulating a really important part of our brain. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys now. And again, if anybody has any questions or burning questions or comments or anything like that, please don't hesitate to let me know, okay?
All right.
So can everybody see this okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, I'm Dr. Sweeney, the Director of Audiology. Started this practice for the physicians at Louisville Family ENT about 4 years ago, or over 4 years ago now. Previously, they did not have an audiology department. And, you know, I was just really ready for the challenge. And, you know, 4.5 years later, we're now 3 audiologists and 2 audiology assistants strong, and we keep growing because I have an amazing team behind me that is as passionate about hearing loss and treating hearing loss as I am. So again, we've got Dr. Lorraine Reimer right here. You know, she is our tinnitus specialist and also awesome with, you know, adult hearing loss. So that's what we specialize in here, is just really treating hearing loss across the board for all of our adults. And then we are so lucky to have Mr. Matthew with us here today. He actually has been wearing, and I'll let you kind of him tell his story later, but he's been wearing hearing aids his whole life. So he knows hearing loss very personally, and has been wearing hearing instruments, you know, since he was a baby. So he's got a really cool insight into hearing loss, and something that I can't even speak to because I myself don't have hearing loss. So I just want to start off, you know, with the most simple kind of understanding of how does this auditory pathway work in terms of our ear. So first, right here, you can see that ear is like a big funnel, and it sends that signal down our ear canal. And then sound is just a vibration. So it actually vibrates those, that eardrum, which then vibrates these 3 tiny bones in your ear. Those are the smallest bones in your body. And then that signal right in here in the cochlea, which is the snail-shaped organ, it's actually arranged like a piano. So it's high pitch, and then as it snails in, it goes to our low pitches. So what happens after it leaves that middle ear system here is that signal is turned into an electrical signal that sends that signal up to our brain, okay? So this piece right here is just kind of what's happening at the ear level. And then inside this cochlea here, we actually have these tiny little microscopic hair cells. And an interesting fact is this little cochlea right here, that can actually fit on the top of like a little pencil eraser. That's how small it is. So inside that little inner ear, we've got hair cells. And so those hair cells actually vibrate back and forth, and they send a signal to our brain if we're hearing a sound. So when they're standing up like this, we're in a quiet environment, but as they vibrate back and forth, and this is the excitatory position, it sends a signal up our brain that we're hearing a sound. So you can see here, these are healthy hair cells, and over here, these are damaged hair cells. Damage due to genetics, medication, noise exposure. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why people have hearing loss. Yeah, absolutely.
So when looking at this screen, when you're looking at these damaged hair cells, if a person comes to me with ringing in the ears, this is the picture that I will show them. And it is most oftentimes the reason for ringing in the ears is because of this distortion of the hair cells. It's the damage, and it can send a sound to the brain that's really not there from the damage that's present to these hair cells that are distorted.
So, so yeah, just like Dr. Reimer said, so this is the excitatory position when it's moved from, you know, the resting position. So you can see these little hair cells here are bent over. Well, what is that signal telling the brain? That there's a sound present, but there is no sound present. So that's what causes that ringing in the ears. And because there's a mismatch between the systems, so vision is going, wait a second, there's nothing in the environment here. Where is that sound coming from? But the ear is telling the brain, yes, there is. It drives the brain crazy. So so, you know, and this obviously isn't a talk about tinnitus, but it's something that's very common with hearing loss. So, and we can take questions at the end. Dr. Reimer obviously will answer any questions that you might have. Sorry, you guys. But this is definitely something that is very common with hearing loss. So, why is it important to treat your hearing loss early? You know, obviously we want people to treat their hearing loss. They can hear better, but sometimes my patients will say, I'm getting by, I'm doing just fine. You know, I just ask people to speak up, slow down, enunciate your words. And what you're really doing is you are, sorry, you guys, there's something on my screen I can't get off. What you're, you know, putting more cognitive load or effort on the brain. So what I tell people is if you do not use your potential hearing, you can lose the ability to understand speech. So what happens to muscle that's not being used? It atrophies, right? So the same thing happens with this auditory center. What happens is that hearing nerve is not being stimulated. That hearing nerve sends a signal to what's called the auditory cortex. And what the auditory cortex is just like the hearing brain. So that's what I refer to it as. So when that signal is not being sent through to the auditory nerve and to that auditory cortex or that hearing brain, that system can atrophy. So that once it's reproduced, it's like, I haven't heard it in so long, I'm not really sure what's going on. So it's really, really important to utilize your hearing potential before auditory deprivation starts to occur. So when your ears are unable to adequately really hear these sounds due to hearing loss, like I said, your hearing brain will just stop receiving these electrical signals because that ear can't funnel or can't get it to the brain. So I tell people a lot of times, I'm like, your ear is just the bridge, right, that gets the signal to the brain, but where all that magic is happening is at the brain level. So again, once those sounds are reintroduced, you know, we can put a hearing aid on these people, but they say, I can hear you, the volume is there, but I still cannot understand what you were saying. And unfortunately, unlike other systems in our body that can rehabilitate, the understanding component of the auditory process is something that you cannot gain back. So the brain is very plastic, and a lot of people on therapies talk about the plasticity, meaning we can retrain pathways, and you know, and different patients have strokes and things of that nature. They can do speech therapy and gain their speech abilities back and things of that nature. But the hearing component is not plastic. So there's really two important aspects that I like to explain to my patients when they come into me. You know, there's volume and clarity. Because a lot of times people come into me and they say, I can hear people. I can hear just fine. I'm not deaf. I just can't understand what they're saying. And so the volume piece is the ear-related piece. So when we test your hearing, we test to see how many decibels of hearing loss do you have, and we low pitch to high pitch, okay? So that just tells me when I look at somebody's hearing test and I can see the little graph, I'm like, okay, I know this is how many decibels of hearing loss they have, and it tells me how much volume they need. We then also test your discrimination or your understanding abilities. So what we do is we give you a subset of words, and in those words, it has all of the phonemes of the English language. So we know that if you are unable to hear some of these sounds, and what we do is we present it at a level loud enough that we know that the brain is getting all the information. So it's kind of simulating what a hearing instrument might do. So it's telling us, what is your potential ability to understand speech? And so what happens is, I mean, that's honestly, when I talk to patients, that's the most important thing that I get from the hearing test, because that is going to be the best predictor you have for hearing aid success, is how well are you able to understand or discern words. Okay, so these are actually two real patients of mine, patient A and patient B. Patient A, and you can see that their hearing loss is very similar. It's the same severity of hearing loss, and patient B's actually might be a little bit worse. So patient A, he's a 66-year-old male with onset of hearing loss. He reported to me at least 10 years prior to coming to see me. And he has his family was really complaining about his hearing, but then he was really starting to get annoyed by it as well. Kind of having some social isolation, would avoid going places because he said, I'm not even going to go because I can't participate, and then I feel like I'm on the outside. Family history of hearing loss. He also had a lot of hearing loss due to noise exposure in the workplace. And he reported, I can hear someone's talking, I just cannot understand what they're saying. And he also says, I have difficulty hearing in background noise. So then patient B, 78-year-old female, she's worn hearing aids for a long time, but she came to me kind of a second opinion because she's like, I've got these hearing aids, but I still can't hear with them. And I honestly thought she might be a cochlear implant candidate. Like, she was like, I just cannot hear with these. I'm very frustrated. So she had this idea that hearing aids weren't working for her. She did not get her hearing aids from us when I initially saw her. So with patient A, when I tested his best ability to understand speech, so this is telling me how well his brain was able to discriminate those sounds, he only got 54% in the right ear and 48% in the left ear. Now, when we put two ears together, we typically get what's called a two-ear advantage. So the ear, the brain can hear with an input from both sides better than just one. And then it jumped up to 72%. So what I could tell this gentleman in particular was I could say, okay, we can fit you with hearing aids and you're going to do better, but your potential hearing in a quiet environment without visual cues is 72%. In noise, it's going to drop at least 20 to 30% from what we see in our clinical, our clinical data. So this person, this individual, he does well, he does okay with his hearing aids, but he's still very frustrated. He's like, the volume is there. The volume wasn't there before. The volume is there, but people still aren't clear. So he still has to rely a lot on those visual cues to help his brain understand the speech. Then we have patient B, okay? More hearing loss than him, but she's been wearing hearing aids for a long time. So what happened was she went to a new provider, got new hearing aids. They were inappropriate for her hearing loss. So the good news for her was I was able to tell you, hey, I can help you. Your speech understanding is excellent. You've got 88% in both ears. We put the two ears together, you get 100% right. That tells me in quiet environment, you should not be struggling at all. Background noise is always going to be a little bit more challenging. But this lady in particular, we fit her with new hearing aids, and she thought she was, it was a miracle. Like, she could hear so well. Well, it's because that brain's potential to understand speech was excellent because she had been stimulating that pathway for so long. Yeah, I just froze. Can everybody see me? Okay, there we are. Did everybody hear that? It froze on my end.
Yes, I heard it.
Okay. So, so that is, something that just kind of important to understand, that not all hearing losses, even if they look the same, are created equal. So not only can it affect the auditory brain, but it can just affect the brain overall. So what about the D word, this dementia word that we hear a lot about with hearing loss? Hearing loss has absolutely been shown to impact the brain function. They've been really studying it heavily since like the late 80s, early 90s, and over longitudinal studies, we've gotten a lot of really great data that supports the fact that there is a big correlation between hearing loss and cognitive decline. And why is that? Well, there's this idea about brain reorganization. So if one part of our brain is lacking information, other parts of our brain will come over to help. But then those other parts of the brain that are coming over to help can't do their primary function. So explain kind of in a graph form is, we've got a hearing impairment. Now we're putting more cognitive load on the brain. It changes the brain structure and function. We also have a reduction in social engagement. And now we've got impaired cognitive functioning and dementia. The reason being is because, and how I like to break it down to patients is, when our brain is lacking that auditory information, it kind of is like, Mayday, Mayday, somebody help me. I can't put it all together. We start to use visual cues. We start to have to really put the puzzle pieces together. We're using context clues. We're thinking about, what did they just say a minute ago to make more sense of this? And then we're using memory cues. So when the memory portion comes over to help the hearing portion, the memory portion goes, oh my gosh, I'm not able to do my primary function, right? It's helping the hearing portion too much. So then we see this high rise of cognitive decline, memory loss, and dementia, and the untreated or inappropriately treated hearing loss population because of this brain or cortical reorganization that happens. So I think that I really liked this study, and I did want to give you guys just some data. I'm kind of a research nerd, but there was a really amazing article that came out in a medical journal in 2013, and they did a study, and they had almost 2,000 patients in this study. So they had a really good number of people, and they were all over the age of 65. And what they found in this population was that and all of these people had hearing loss that wasn't being treated. So people who have untreated hearing loss or inappropriately treated hearing loss had a 30 to 40% accelerated rate of cognitive decline over a 6-year period compared to individuals with normal hearing. So that's pretty remarkable. Now, when I talk about hearing loss and cognitive decline, I don't want anybody to hear me say hearing loss causes this, but we see this large correlation. And so, you know, there's all of these theories as why this happens. And the one that they think is the most relatable is this cortical, or that brain reorganization that I mentioned, okay? So that is my portion of the presentation. So now I am going to hand it over to Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me right now?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay. I wanted to thank Abigail, Dr. Sweeney, Dr. Reimer for having me here today to present on hearing loss. It's something I'm very passionate about. I've worn hearing aids my whole life. There's nothing I enjoy more than to speak to other people with hearing loss and just kind of talk them through their challenges and talk about what's available now, because nobody should be held down by their hearing loss. There are things out there that we can do to help you out, and in no better hands than in Dr. Sweeney and Dr. Reimer's hands. So I've seen them work with their patients, and it's been humbling to see the care that they can provide to their patients. So I really appreciate that. What we're going to do now is I am going to try to take over the screen share right now. And before I hit a button, I always get a little bit nervous because I have the ability to just break technology whenever I can. So I'm going to press this button and hopefully I don't get kicked out of the Zoom meeting or anything. So if that happens, I will get back in, but let's give this a shot here. You know what, Abigail, it says that the host disabled participant screen sharing. So it looks like we might have a little bit of a screen share issue, but if that's the case, no worries. I can just have you click through.
Oh. I'll just click through. I'm scared too.
Okay. And then what I will also say is that I am presenting out of my home office right now, and I have 3 labs, a black lab, yellow lab, and a chocolate lab. And I'm just praying that the mailman doesn't come in the next half an hour. So if the mailman comes and you hear a lot of ruckus, you'll know why. I will mute myself for a couple of seconds and jump on. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And I don't want to put you to sleep with a PowerPoint. So I would love, if you feel comfortable, if you can unmute yourself, because I'm going to have everybody engage during the presentation. I'll have you yell out answers and let me know what your thoughts are as we go through the presentation. So
Hang on, Matt. I just made you co-host, so if you want to try that again.
okay, let's try it right now. And it says this will stop the other screen sharing, so that looks like it will stop yours. So I will say yes to this.
Yeah.
And click screen.
You've started sharing.
You know what? I'm going to take back over, Matt. You were just supposed to ask for control of my screen.
There's Missy and Bob.
You sound soft.
Jody.
Matt, you're muted.
This is hilarious. Okay. Let me get back here.
Okay, I am back on right now.
Yes, you are.
But Abigail, what I may do is I might have you do the clicking through the screen.
Yeah. Okay, can you guys see the slides again? Sorry about that.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm going to click through them.
And everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So without looking at the screen, how many people do you think in America have hearing loss? Nobody can look at the screen right now.
A lot. A lot.
A lot. That is correct. Yes, whoever said a lot is correct. It is.
Debbie.
This particular screen is the data is a little bit outdated. So a lot of people have hearing loss, over 11% of the US population. And so this is something, you're not alone. The people in here, this meeting room, are not alone with this. You're in good company here. A lot of people struggle with hearing loss, but 36 million people are not wearing hearing aids. So just because somebody doesn't have hearing aids on, it doesn't mean they don't have hearing loss. And it's actually the opposite. So it used to be that you would see a big set of hearing aids on somebody and you would say, oh, that person has hearing loss. Well, now they're so small. I'm actually wearing hearing aids now. You can't even see them. But now the people who can't hear you and you're at dinner and they're leaning forward and they're pinching their eyebrows trying to hear what you're saying, that's the person with hearing loss, the person struggling and not being able to hear, and it's taking away from their social environments and things like that. So yes, a lot of people have hearing loss. You're not alone. Abigail, you can click over to the next one here, next statistic.
No, I'm sorry.
You're good. Many different causes of hearing loss. So you could have hereditary effects. That's where I got my hearing loss. My sister and I were both born with hearing loss. It skipped my brother in between us. So typical age-related changes, we call that presbycusis. That just happens to a lot of people as they age. They get hearing loss. Side effects of medications, that can be very difficult. Some people, you might know somebody who has single-sided deafness. Maybe they took medication, they lost hearing in one ear. Now they are relying on one ear instead of two, and that's a very, very challenging situation to adapt to. And then there should be maybe one more bullet here. Look like exposure to noise. This is a very, very common one. So we're just not meant to be exposed to the noise that we're exposed to nowadays, whether we go to rock concerts. I suspect a lot of you go to heavy metal concerts, rock concerts, right? Now but it's truly, it's the music in our car. It is the cars driving on the side of the road, working on a drill. If anybody served in the military, thank you for your service. A lot of the exposure that you were exposed to, gunfire, things like that, this all accumulates. And for a lot of people, this can lead to significant hearing loss. So we can go to the next slide here. What are some of the common signs of hearing loss? So just to get some feedback from some of the group members here, what are some other symptoms that you see in somebody that has hearing loss, or maybe that you might be experiencing on your own?
Background noise.
Yep. Any others?
Asking to repeat things over.
What?
Asking, yes, yeah, exactly.
Stop
Yep.
that.
So what we have here, and Abigail, you can click 2 times here, and it will show everything here. You guys will see how many times I've presented this presentation or things like it, just based on how many clicks I know that we have to go through certain presentations here. But the big thing is people seem to be mumbling, because even for most of you that have hearing loss, you can hear volume. You can hear volume. Volume comes in the lower frequencies. What makes it hard for you to hear in crowded noises is that high frequency information. So the SHs, the THs, things like that. That gives you the clarity. So somebody might not think that they have hearing loss because they can actually hear volume, but it's actually the clarity, the high frequency information that they're missing out on. So that might make it seem like somebody is mumbling where they're actually not. When you say that everybody else is mumbling and you're not, it's probably more likely that you have hearing loss and everybody else is speaking clearly. It's also harder to follow conversations in meetings, restaurants, or noisy places. That's a given. That's the most difficult spot for people with hearing loss. And then this is really what we want to avoid in providing amplification for people with hearing loss. We do not want them to limit themselves socially, because when you do that, that's where the onset of depression can become a little bit more of a greater risk. That's when the risk of cognitive decline can really come into place. So,
Debbie, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I'm good for now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, she raised her hand. Sorry.
okay.
I did. No, I'm good.
Okay.
So when we talk about hearing, Dr. Sweeney already went through, kind of how we hear, and we really don't hear with our ears. Our ears act as the funnel to our brain, but we actually hear and make sense of sounds with our brain. So looking at this chart here, I'm gonna have to get my readers out to read this, but both of your ears work together to pick up sounds occurring around you. That's what your ears are doing. That's what their process, or their part in the process is. Your brain then makes sense of the sound by matching them to sounds stored in your memory. And then your ears convert sounds into nerve impulses that travel to your brain, and your brain needs as much information as possible to turn these sounds into meanings, because everybody has heard sounds at one point, for the most part. If you've had the onset of hearing loss later in life, you've had hearing at one point. We just need your brain understands what these sounds are. So the sooner that we can get that sound back into your brain, the less your brain will atrophy, and the better you'll be able to make sense of sounds around you. So as we go through the presentation, just understand that we actually hear with our brain. We just get audibility. We get the information from our ears, but we actually hear and make sense of the sounds with our brain. Okay, Abigail, you can switch to the next one, please. So how does your how does your brain make sense of sounds? We can just click through these here. This is kind of a little reiteration of what we talked about before, but the brain the brain constantly uses both ears to orient itself and know what's happening in the environment. Next slide. Now you can recognize, depending on the ability to recognize a sound in order to make sense of it. That's what the brain does. Click. Then you can focus. The brain uses both ears to focus on what's important, especially in noisy sound environments. And one more click. And then the brain can separate relevant sound from competing noise. So the point of amplification is just not to amplify everything, but also to allow you to amplify what you need in most situations, the clearly defined speech around you, without amplifying all of that speech babble and all of the noise and the clanging of the dishes, things like that. So the hearing aid can be very sophisticated in doing that. So this is where we're gonna have a little bit of fun here. We're gonna play a little exercise here. And I'm gonna click through, or Dr. Sweeney is gonna click through about 7 or 8 slides. And we're gonna be on each slide for about 1 second. So the clicks are going to be pretty quick. And I want everybody, there's going to be one word on every slide. And I would like everybody as quickly as possible to say what word to read out loud or yell it out loud, what word you see on the screen. So, okay, we're going to, everybody understands what we're doing here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let's give it a shot here.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Toast.
Toast,
Basket.
Table.
table,
Lunch.
track,
Glass.
glass,
Washer.
Washer. Buckle.
Stone.
Stones.
lunch,
Punch.
Toast.
Post.
Shoes.
So you guys were making me look bad at first, but it did get a little bit harder as we went through. And the reason that did get harder is because the information that you were getting was being delivered in a way that was harder to process it with your brain. It was out of order, written diagonally, written out of order, things like that. So the point that I was trying to make with that exercise is somebody with hearing loss is getting their information as they would in the later slides. Somebody with no hearing loss or correctly treated hearing loss is getting information like they would be earlier on in the slides. So that's why people with hearing loss, when they're in a crowded environment, they begin to fall behind on the conversation. Because they get the first couple of words with each sentence, but then they start to fall behind because the information that they're getting is just not that clear. And I did see a little message here from Denise. Are you able to hear me a little bit better now? I can move my computer a little closer. Let me know if you're not able to hear me. And I'll try to talk a little louder into the computer. It might be a microphone issue as well. So just looking at this slide, if you have hearing loss, it disrupts the normal relationship between your ears and your brain. Okay, so in order, your brain receives less sound information, just like we did later on in the slides. That makes it harder for your brain to recognize sounds. Then you're having to guess what people are saying, which forces you to concentrate harder. Has anybody guessed the wrong thing? Somebody was talking and you thought you heard what they said and they didn't, and makes you kind of look silly in front of other people?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The extra effort leaves less mental capacity for remembering conversation. So going back to Dr. Sweeney's presentation, we were talking about when one part of your brain is compromised, you start to rely on other parts of your brain. So if you're constantly really stressing out to understand what's being said, or if you're using visual cues to look at what somebody is saying, maybe lip reading, things like that, you're putting a lot of mental energy into listening, and then you have less cognitive resources to apply to remembering what was actually being said. So it is definitely, there are real life applications to it. I know that with my company, we have some Danish speakers, and sometimes they will present presentation to our company and they have a very strong accent. And for me, I have to focus very hard on what they're saying. And because I'm focusing so hard on every word, I can hear every word that they say, but then when they're done talking, I don't remember what they said because I wasn't using my cognitive energy to understand what was being said. I was just trying to hear it. So what happens then? You feel more tired after conversation. So very often people with hearing loss become more tired around 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they've just been putting a lot more into making sense of the world around them than people with normal hearing. And then here we go again. You're more tempted to withdraw from social interaction. So I brought that up a couple of times. Let's talk about the issue with that and what can happen if you withdraw yourself from the world around you. All right, Dr. Sweeney, thank you. So there was a study done in 2015 with the Journal of American Geriatric Society regarding hearing loss. And what they concluded was that hearing loss is associated with accelerated cognitive decline in older adults. There was a 25-year follow-up study on 20,000 participants. An accelerated hearing or cognitive decline reported between normal hearing and hearing loss subjects. But this is the main takeaway here. There was no difference in decline between normal hearing and those with correctly treated hearing loss. So you can, everybody is going to decline slowly over time. That's just a fact of life. But if you have hearing loss, you are going to decline in most cases at a faster rate. But if you have correctly treated hearing loss, you will decline at the rate that somebody with normal hearing does. And when I say correctly treated hearing loss, that's not just throwing a hearing aid on your ears and expecting that it's going to help you out. Correctly treated hearing loss is getting good technology and being fit in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing with an audiologist who can provide you that care. That is the difference, because you can get hearing aids for $300, $400, $500 online. You can get them at box stores. Those kind of things, if anything, could be more damaging for your hearing and your cognitive functionality. You need to be fit in the hands of of an audiologist that has a lot of experience, who can understand what your needs are, how you like to hear, what your perceptual needs are. And so that's a very important part of the puzzle here. Next slide, please. This is just a graph representation of what I just talked about. We talk about people with good hearing, the cognitive decline versus untreated hearing loss, and the difference between the two being adequate hearing care as you get older. Next slide. So hearing and health issues. So let's talk about the D word, dementia. And people often say to me, Matt, if I have hearing loss, does that mean I'm at a higher risk of getting dementia? And that's a very, very complicated question to answer. And I would never want to scare anybody with the answer, but the answer is it can be. In some cases, no, but in some cases, it can lead to an increased risk of dementia. And here's why. So, Abigail, if you can click on a couple more times, I know this will fill out a little bit. But basically, when you look at this graph here, 2/3 of everybody who ultimately gets dementia at some point in their lives got dementia based on genetic reasons or reasons that we cannot explain. So I can't tell you that in 2/3 of the cases that hearing loss has anything to do with it, because we just don't know. There's a lot that we don't know about dementia. But what we do know is that 1/3, so that 2/3 is non-modifiable reasons that people get dementia. We don't know why they get it, so we can't explain it. But what we do know is that 1/3 of the patients, or 1/3 of the people who get dementia at some point, get it based on reasons that they could have avoided earlier on in life. And what we can do is go to the next slide to see what those different reasons are and things that you can do to try to avoid the onset of dementia.
Yeah, Matt, I just want to interrupt just for 1 second.
Yes.
And I think one of the other important things is, just like Matt said, just because you don't treat your hearing loss does not mean you may not be in this, like, population or this percentage of people, but you don't know if you're going to be one of those or not, right? So that's a really important message to, to hear, is that obviously we want everybody hearing better, but you also want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to reduce that risk.
Absolutely. Yep, very good point. So this is the chart here that kind of explains some of the different non-modifiable versus modifiable risk factors. So going back to the unexplained and the genetics, that makes up your 65%, your 2/3 of the population that we can't explain at this point. But what we do know is that another 1/3 of the population can get dementia or increased risk of dementia based on less education earlier on in life. In midlife, you got hearing loss, 9%, hypertension, obesity, smoking later in life, depression, physical inactivity, social isolation, and diabetes. So when we talk about hearing loss, what can hearing loss lead to? Well, you have 9% of the non-modifiable, or of the overall dementia cases, could be attributed to hearing loss, but hearing loss can also lead to depression and social isolation. So when you break hearing loss down and you say, can hearing loss lead to dementia? My answer to you would be, in 15% of cases of people with dementia, that hearing loss could have been contributed to that. So the answer is, it can. And I certainly want to, the way I see it is, reduce any factor of having to suffer through the onset of dementia. We can try to reduce every percentage that we can.
Matt, I've also sometimes think about the indirect causes of hearing loss, not the direct,
There,
which we were talking
I got the
about.
mail and also got a package off the porch.
Depression and social isolation are sometimes protective factors against dementia. So I had actually gone to another talk from Oticon, and they had talked about certain things that protect you from it. So a lot of my patients withdraw so gradually that they don't even realize that they're not interacting. And they were actually talking about social interaction and being a protective factor against dementia. So, you know, we talk about it being not completely, a causation, but like can be linked.
Absolutely, very good point.
And then I will often ask patients, it's interesting to see them kind of like think, because I'm like, well, how active are you? Like, what do you like to do and whatever? And they'll be like, oh, I just kind of sit at home. I don't really do that much. And then I'll say, oh, okay. Well, were you always that way? Or
Mhm.
are you kind of a homebody? Are you, you know, just an introvert? Or do you think that could be because, and they'll start to think and they'll be like, you know what? You're right. I think that I don't go to those places anymore because I struggle so much. So it makes people take a second thought about, why am I not doing that stuff? You know, because a lot of them will answer so quickly, oh, I don't do that much. You know, I'm at home, whatever. And I'm like, would you like to do more? And a lot of times the answer to the question, once they think about it, is yes.
Hmm. That's a really good point, because for a lot of people, the onset of hearing loss could have taken 10, 15, 20 years before they've done anything about it. And it's been so gradual that you actually never realized that it was happening while it was happening. So for a lot of people, they feel like they're not as active as they used to be because they feel like they're just getting older, where actually it's because they're not hearing as well. And things going out in public and socializing with friends and family has just gotten harder and harder and harder over a 15-year period. Well, you forget who you were at one point when hearing loss wasn't causing the difficulty that it is now. So those are all really good points. So this slide here is just basically, you know, people have the choice to do nothing about their hearing loss, or they can go forward. And just with everybody just being here today, you have already taken that first step in learning more about hearing loss. So what I'll do now is talk about the different technology and the different things that we have nowadays that we didn't even have a year ago, let alone 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. Technology has come a long way. So how can we use technology to help your brain hear more naturally? So what we do with the technology, with the hearing aids, is we preserve the important details in the speech. So we give you that in a lot of cases. Some people have unique hearing losses, but in most cases, as you get older, you lose high frequency hearing. So we want to give that clarity back to you so that you can reduce the effort that you need to put into listening around you, so that you can improve your recall of conversations. So we can help your ears work together to identify and localize where sounds are coming from around you. It'll keep you safer too. And then we'll take your personal listening preferences into account. The reason I say that is because two people can have a very similar hearing loss, but they need to hear completely different types of situations. So, so two audiograms can yield a completely different experience for a user. And hearing aids are mini computers nowadays, and we can tailor to your exact specific needs. But you need to be in the hands of an audiologist who knows how to use the hearing aids to their full capacity to be able to benefit from that. Next slide, please. Perfect. So what is, for the people on this call, what is the single most difficult situation for hearing aid users or people with untreated hearing loss? This is where I usually have like candy that I can hand out and whoever participates. Yes. What are some of the difficult scenarios that you guys find yourselves in? What's the most difficult scenario?
Large crowds.
Large crowds. That is exactly it. So we can go to the next slide here. So here's a large crowd here. And so this is technically the most difficult situation to hear. You have a big table, you're at the middle of it, you have people talking all around you, and you have somebody playing the cello from across from you. So I've never had somebody play the cello for me at dinner, but I can imagine that that adds another complexity to the difficulty. But what we're really getting to here is even at a table of 4 people, a table of 5 people, a table of 10 people, when there are other people speaking around you, that is the most difficult scenario. And the reason why is because if somebody was speaking to me and somebody was playing the guitar behind me, I could still hear that person very well because I'm trying to hear that speech signal in the presence of a completely different musical rhythmic signal. Where it becomes more challenging for people with hearing loss is when they try to hear somebody speaking in the presence of other people speaking, because the signal of interest, the person that you're talking to, has a very similar signal to what you're trying to avoid. And so you're trying to hear one person while getting rid of all of the other speech signals around them. So the most difficult situation for somebody with hearing loss is when they are trying to hear somebody in the presence of many other people talking. So we used to really never have a good solution for this. If you go to the next slide here, Abigail, this is what we used to do in the past. The hearing aids were only sophisticated enough to say, there's just too much going on around me. So now I'm just going to focus on what's in front of me. And so you see that guy looking across the table, and it looks like he's looking with laser vision at that person that he's trying to listen to, because that was the only way that hearing aids in the past have been able to try to get rid of all of the other noise while preserving somebody in front of you. The problem with this experience then is that in this environment, you can only hear somebody in front of you. But a lot of times the people or the person in front of you may not be the signal of interest. How many times have you been to dinner and you're talking to somebody, or you're looking straight ahead and somebody's trying to talk to you from the side and they can't get your attention, so they have to tap on your shoulder. And then you look over and you say, what? That's because even if you have hearing aids in the past, they were designed to look straight ahead. Okay, so what we have now is we came out with a new hearing aid that can allow you to hear the 360-degree soundscape of the environment, but it's actually a more quiet hearing aid than some of the beam-forming hearing aids that I showed you in the previous slide. So Abigail, if you can just click 3 more times, it'll stay on the same slide here. So what if we could have access to the 360-degree environment just like somebody with normal hearing does, where sound sources are balanced? We want to be able to hear sounds around us, but we don't want them to be overwhelming. We don't want those sounds to take away from the speech that we're trying to listen to. Okay, and then without the disturbing noise, we don't want to be bothered by the clanging of dishes and some of the loud impulse sounds that can happen. So we want to protect your hearing. We couldn't do this before, but now we have a hearing aid that is able to do this. We can go to the next slide. So some of the other situations that are really hard for people with hearing impairments are wind. So this goes for somebody with hearing aids. So hearing aids of the past and other hearing aids on the market, whenever there's wind noise, the hearing aid volume shuts down because it doesn't have the ability to differentiate that wind noise from the speech that you're trying to listen to. So with the hearing aids that I used to wear, if I'd be driving in a golf cart and somebody was trying to talk to me, but it was a little bit windy because we're going about 7 miles per hour, it became very hard to hear because the overall volume of my hearing aid would turn down. But now we have a hearing aid that can attenuate and minimize wind noise without affecting the speech.
So I just want to like talk about the technology a little bit, just so that patients better understand it. Because sometimes when I'm explaining it, they're like, how can a hearing aid do that? So the simplest way that I kind of break it down for the patient is, so hearing aids, pretty much all other hearing aids only have one processor in them. And then they use other technology to try to kind of reduce the noise. So what happens with a one processor hearing aid is all the speech and all the noise goes in the same processor. So as things get turned up and down, everything's getting turned up and down kind of equally. So like he's saying, if you are exposed to that wind noise and the hearing aid's like, well, I don't want that, it turns it down, but now the speech that he's trying to hear gets turned down too, right? So what is sound? Sound's a waveform. So if you look like these crazy, equipment that can measure sound or whatever, it's actually waveform, it's vibration. So speech is very interesting. It's got peaks and valleys and pauses in it. And then noise, it's pretty steady state. So what happens in these hearing instruments, they have two monitoring systems or two little processors in them. So anything that looks like speech, it's got peaks, valleys, and pauses. These hearing aids are so fast, they're able to make like hundreds of decisions per second. So it can measure that waveform and it knows, okay, this is speech, this is interesting, Matt wants to hear this. And now this wind, that definitely is not going to have those peaks, valleys, and pauses. That's going to go in the other processor. Speech gets turned up and it gets to be the priority. So both signals aren't being turned up and turned down together. Having said that, if you have somebody annoying sitting next to you and their speech, it's going to pick it up. It's not going to turn that down because it's a speech signal. So you just have to it is so impressive what they've been able to do, and patients validate it. They come in and they're like, whoa, I can hear the noise, but it's not as distracting. And that's not the goal. We're not noise canceling, right? Because it's happening in the environment. I hear it too. But what we want to do for the hearing impaired user is separate the two signals, because we need to bring the signal above the noise. And old hearing aid, or not even old hearing aids, current hearing aids on the market can't do that because there's only one processor, only one monitoring system in
We've
them.
actually been able to show it in clinic too. We test patients with comparisons. They come in with other hearing aids. We'll show them, we'll do a test in with speech with their hearing aids and with current technology that we're fitting on patients, and we can measure it.
Yeah. So, it's not just like a marketing thing. And that's one thing we're really big about here. I'm going to make sure it works before I recommend it to a patient. You know what I mean? And it definitely works. And patients are really satisfied and they comment about the difference. It's just easier, right? Because we're helping our patients get that signal above the noise.
Mm-hmm. Great points. And one thing I can say to everybody is that the staff at Louisville Family Audiology, they ask the difficult questions. That no manufacturer is going to come in and just say, oh, this is the best, and they're just going to accept that, because they've really put you to the challenge and understand why this is different than anything else on the market. And I really respect them for doing that. So they always have their patient's interest at heart, and they want to provide the best technology. So that's a testament to what you all have done there. It's been amazing. So the connectivity, accessories, and apps. So let me just say that hearing aids are a lot cooler nowadays than they used to be. When I was young, it looked like I had big bananas on my ears, and they didn't have any accessories that my hearing aids could connect to. So now my hearing aids can connect to my iPhone. So if my wife were to call me right now, I would get my phone call. I can make it ring in my hearing aids, and I can talk to her like this, and I can hear everything in my hearing aids, and nobody can hear what's coming out of the phone. So the sound quality is amazing. It's so much easier to hear now on the phone than it used to be. We have a TV box, so I can make it so I can stream in my hearing aids anything that's coming out of the TV. So if I'm watching a movie, I hear it in stereo sound quality, prescribed to my hearing loss directly in my ears. You can hear whatever's on the TV so much better than you used to be able to. One other thing is our hearing aids come in a rechargeable version. People with vision issues, dexterity issues, maybe their fingers don't work like they used to. We have the ability to allow you to put the hearing aids in a charger so that you don't have to worry about changing the batteries. A lot of people like these rechargeable hearing aids nowadays. They're a lot more reliable than other rechargeable solutions on the market.
That is for sure. And the other comment I want to make, though, is sometimes people get a little bit overwhelmed when they see this stuff. And so don't think that this is all stuff that is overwhelming at all. I have 90-year-olds using some of this technology or whatever. So it definitely is something that is not complicated. It's very easy, very user-friendly. And a lot of people talk about bells and whistles in here. I don't need all those bells and whistles. All hearing aids, even the lowest technology, have these connectivity accessories and apps available. So it has nothing to do with the actual cost of the instrument. What drives the cost of an instrument is actually the signal processing. So because a lot of people come in here, wow, I don't need the Mercedes. And I'm like, don't think about it, don't dumb it down to transportation. But if you're going to, we're not going to talk about Kia, Toyota, Mercedes. We're going to talk about skateboard, bicycle, car. I can go home on my skateboard, but do I want to? No, because my body is going to be exhausted by the time I get home because I've used all that physical effort. Same thing with hearing instruments. You know, you could wear a skateboard, but why not get the bicycle or the car for your brain so that it's easier for your brain to hear in all of these different environments? So when we talk about that, a lot of times people have this like preconceived notion that I don't need Bluetooth or connectivity or whatever. It's standard now. You know, and it's like, you know, like automatic windows used to not be standard, but now they're standard in all cars. Same thing with this stuff that we're talking about here.
Yep. And they're, like you said, they're so easy to use. I don't have to do anything crazy when somebody calls me. I just pick up the phone like I normally would, and it plays in both ears. We make it really easy on you. We want you to put the hearing aids on and forget that you have them in. We don't want you to always be on your phone trying to click through. How do I do this? We make it very easy when we develop this technology. So just to wrap up my presentation, what is the main takeaway? Abigail, you can go to the next. It really is to invest in your hearing. Hearing care is an investment. It is an investment to make your life quality from the moment you wake up until you go to bed at night much better. People say, well, hearing aids can be expensive, but for what it does for you every day, connecting you with your family members, providing you better cognitive health over the long term, this is a healthcare decision. And my biggest takeaway is always to invest in your hearing. Once you do that, you will be happier. You'll be more present for the people that you love. You'll be more engaged with the people around you. I just want to say thank you for everybody for being here today. I don't do this presentation for all of my practices. I just do it for a select few because it is my goal to get hearing care fit to the people who need it in the hands of somebody who can provide it the best. And that is the staff at Louisville Family Audiology, what they do for their patient versus what other people or other customers or other practices can do is really the big difference maker. Technology gets you part of the way, and it's a big part of it, but the main part of it is the healthcare, the care that your audiologist has for you. That's such a big part of it. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. I know Abigail is going to wrap it up here, but thank you for taking your time. And if you have any questions for me, I'm going to stay on for a little while here. But thank you again. I appreciate it.
So just in conclusion, you know, like to drive the point home, hearing care really is healthcare. You know what I mean? It's definitely something worthy of investing in. Not only invest in, you know, in all those factors that Matt discussed, but also really investing in your brain. Don't forget, use it or lose it. And that untreated or inappropriately treated hearing loss can definitely impact your brain function.